Hello, today I'm going to talk about the research paper, The Mark of a Criminal Record. This paper examines the audit approach, which determines if a criminal record is an obstacle when it comes to employment. It stresses the consequences of incarcerating felons of different races. So this paper actually focuses primarily on Black and white felons. And in the end, it talks about the results of employment when it comes to finding a job. So the study that I read about in this paper was the audit approach, and the audit approach actually examined team pairs applying for entry-level jobs to officially test that if you do have a criminal record, will it affect your employment opportunities? And by using this model, I think it proves that having a criminal record can be a barrier towards employment among equally capable candidates. Additionally, by changing the race of the tester pairs, one can actually examine the way race and a criminal record can produce new outcomes in labor market inequalities. I also noticed that the paper used longitudinal survey data to study employment probabilities for individuals who have been incarcerated. So longitudinal data tracks the same sample at different points in time. The sample can consist of individuals, which is used in my research paper, and it can also consist of households, establishments, and so on. But even though survey data was used in this research paper, it proved difficult because of all the possible unmeasured factors between felons and non-offenders. Also, while looking at the survey data, I saw that there was no evidence to prove a direct link between the relationship between incarceration and employment outcomes, so this can cause limitations in the study. Another limitation of survey research is that it fails to directly classify mechanisms, and these mechanisms could probably lead to similar outcomes, which broadens the results of the study. So we can see here in this figure that incarceration does link to employment outcomes, but it's also missing factors of race, personality traits, and other factors that we would need to show in the results. Another drawback to survey data are the variables. Without direct mechanisms, we have to consider these variables, some being the labeling effects of a criminal record and the influence of social networks. These variables make it hard to comprehend which study would be the best. I do believe that the motivation for this research stems from there not being enough awareness about this topic. There are not enough tests, there are not enough studies, and the results show that there are consequences that lead to racial disparities in the labor force. When it comes to government involvement, many states have passed legislations expanding fair employment regulations to protect individuals with criminal records from discrimination by their employers, which was a variable that we used in the study that had significant effects. At the end of this research paper, I was able to conclude that race and having a criminal record does play into getting a job and has caused consequences in the labor market. Taking this course has really helped me understand our economy and how I can actually now apply this knowledge to better understand racial disparities. As I read this research paper, I noticed that a lot of the results were shown in bar graphs. Graphs was a brief section that we covered in the textbook. I was able to learn that graphs present visual ways to show ideas that could otherwise be unclear using mathematical equations or with words to describe it. In my research paper, the variables were the number of criminals with a criminal record, Black or white, and then unemployment. And these can be clearly examined using a graph, especially bar graphs, which were used to show the results in my paper. These bar graphs show the results of the effect of having a criminal record on employment opportunities for white applicants in comparison to Black applicants. The main effects of race and criminal record here are statistically significant. The black bars represent a criminal record, and the striped bars represent no criminal record. After following the results of the bar graph, we're now going to talk about the main economic model that was used in the research paper. So the main economic model that was used and tested in this research paper was the audit approach. For this study, the test included 4 males that were in college. 2 of the males were Black and the other 2 were white, and they tested these pairs by race. Within each pair, one person was labeled with a criminal record which stated a drug conviction. They did that because it is important to note that the employer might differentiate his hire based on the type of offense. So the design of the study had the teams present themselves at interviews for entry-level jobs, and some of the other designs that went into this study included manipulating the candidates' work histories so that the labor market would be absent to other biased results. The second major design that this economic research paper used was education. They made it known that the non-offender actually graduated a year later than his other classmates. In a sense, this was supposed to equal out the non-offender and the criminal who had served time in prison. The variable of bias really did impact the results, and this bias stems from the later graduated non-offender. This is because hopefully one would think that the later graduate might be less motivated to work than the criminal who did work time in prison. Indeed, these results did show that the effect of a criminal record and employment opportunities for white applicants was statistically significant in comparison to black applicants, and for the black testers, there was 24% less likely to receive a job offer in comparison to the white testers, with the finding that there was a 20-point difference between white and black offenders and white and black non-offenders. And there was a 17% chance of the white testers with a criminal record to still receive favorable treatment than 14% blacks without a criminal record. Eventually, we were able to examine the results from the bar graph, which concluded that race continually seems to be a barrier when it comes to employment opportunities in the labor force, even disregarding a criminal record. Here you can see the effect of a criminal record of employment opportunities for white applicants in comparison to the other white applicants without a record. It is clear here that the results show that having a criminal record closes the door for employment opportunities. So if I were able to choose my own economic model to explain this research, I would use a time series graph. I would use a time series graph because it would show the results of audit research over time in the US. And additionally, I would use this graph because it advances an argument about how our economy works when it comes to racial disparities. If I were to use a time series graph, I would use it to focus on studies and conduct new tests that focus on how criminal records are barriers for employment, and I could also show how employers may use this information to make biased decisions when it comes to hiring ex-cons. So hopefully in the long run, I could show how this graph shows how one set of events can cause another set of events and see positive results in the end. I think that this economic research paper and my hypothetical model could help improve the world by bringing awareness to this topic. And what I mean by this is I would hope that this research will bring awareness to the discrimination that still happens in the workplace. And yes, there has been government legislations to stop discrimination in the workplace, but it still goes on today. So I would hope that this research would help create policies to better work environments and employment options for ex-cons. One of the things that did shock me after reading this paper was seeing that once you're labeled a felon, you lose basic human rights. So I wasn't surprised to see that discrimination in the workplace happening to white ex-cons, but more so for black ex-cons and black non-offenders. There is so much that goes into being accustomed when you get out of jail that I think it would be beneficial to have policies that better transition ex-cons back into society and even more so into the workplace. Ex-cons are already under stress mentally, so I think going out there and exploiting oneself is really hard. And if you're treated differently based on the color of your skin, along with the mark of a criminal record, it can really change the outcomes of testing. Finally, I do think that there should be more legislation put into place to amend discrimination so that there are better opportunities for ex-cons to lead a better lifestyle. As it stated in the paper, ex-cons are more likely to stay committed and do well at their jobs so that they don't go back to prison. So I think more awareness around ex-cons and racial disparities could bring about beneficial policies that could eventually make positive change. Thank you for watching. Some more resources to educate yourself on mass incarceration is the book, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. She's actually an associate professor at The Ohio State University who studies law. Or you could watch the documentary 13th on Netflix by Ava DuVernay.